Welcome back to the Reactive Training Systems podcast. In today's episode, we have another roundtable discussion with coaches Mike Tushir, John Garofano, Ross Lepala, and myself, Jim Ellie, about individualizing pivot blocks. Pivot blocks are like the second level order priority when it comes to developing your training plan. And in the emerging strategies framework, pivot blocks just do not get enough love. Development blocks are where we spend most of our energy and our time, but pivot blocks can be the difference between whether or not your first week of your development block goes well or if you undershoot or overshoot. And it can be really frustrating, especially the longer that you use emerging strategies. Understanding how to use pivot blocks can really be the difference maker in capitalizing and maximizing your success in the long term. After that discussion with the coaches, we talk with Amanda Allen, or should I say myself and John Garofano, Amanda's coach. Have a chance to speak with Amanda Allen as she tells us her story about how she got into powerlifting, how she found out about the USAPL, and ended up at top 5 at Raw Nationals this year. If you're unaware, top 5 at Raw Nationals is an incredible feat. And we learned from her how she made it happen, how she went from being a weightlifter to a CrossFitter, and then made her way into powerlifting, where moving things quickly is not the most important thing anymore. If you enjoy this episode, please consider sharing it to Instagram and tagging at Reactive Training Systems Podcast, and maybe even giving us a follow. That'd be pretty sweet. We really appreciate your feedback and the questions that you ask us to help fuel these podcasts. Every single week, we have a weekly Q&A on our Instagram at Reactive Training Systems that we use for content on YouTube, for this podcast, for Instagram posts, and ultimately to help you become a stronger lifter with a better understanding of your training process. Everything that we do is about developing the athlete process and making it as individualized as possible. And as you'll learn about from last week, we talked about adaptive templates. Adaptive templates are like the creative fuel for learning about different athlete processes and what you can learn from them and apply that to your own training. So if you're interested in that, then please visit www.reactivetrainingsystems.com where you can learn more about adaptive templates and how they can help you in your training processes. Thank you, and let's get right into the episode. Okay, so in this kind of little intro we got going on, we're talking about pivot blocks. We're talking about some of the things we've learned about pivot blocks and how they work into the individualization process for ourselves as athletes and our lifters that we work with. Obviously, the level one is try to figure out things like your time to peak with your development block. How long does it need to be? How long does the pivot block need to be? And then from there, it sometimes goes undervalued, the importance of kind of dialing in the pivot block. Or maybe we find that it's not super important, but it's still valuable to individualize it to some level. And Ross, I believe you have like the most creative experience as a lifter with your pivot blocks. And I'm hoping to hear a little bit about that to start off.
Yeah, for sure. I suppose one of the things that kind of started it out was the perceived frustrations of having the same start and stop point every development block and not really feeling like the average trend was really climbing. So the intent and hope was to try and get a little more strength retention out of the pivot block and try and capture some of that. So with a lot of there was actually 2 adjustments we made. With the pivot block, the adjustment we made, the style of it, rather, the adjustment we made was to bring a bit more specificity into it, where, historically we would avoid doing any competition exercises so that we can reduce the fatigue and increase the response stimulus to the competition exercises. Well, we decided to keep those in and just make sure that the loading protocols were drastically different. So Development blocks usually for me would consist of a by 1 at 8 with some type of back offsets, either RPE based or percent based. And so in the pivot block, we adjusted that to by 3 at 8 with some 70% triples. So super easy, low RPE work. And that would help keep my strength. I would start the subsequent development blocks at a higher starting point. And so that kind of that did its job. That felt real good. The other adjustment to the development blocks we made was that as time went on, week 6 began. My time to peak was 6 weeks, and week 6 seemed to be less and less productive. Especially the second half of week 6, I was completely done and over it. I didn't want to go in and do any of the accessory work. So it was like, all right, well, there doesn't seem to be that much benefit to doing week 6. Let's just drop to 5 weeks and run with that higher specificity pivot and carry more strength out of the pivot block and see what happens. And it was a great response. I had some really successful blocks with it right away. The caution tape with it to realize that it's not necessarily a sustainable burn rate. So the way to look at it would be probably every third pivot, either do a full fatigue scrub or look at extending it 2 weeks. Because if you look at, historically look at time to peak or the length of a pivot block being 1/3 the length of a development block. Well, 5/3 doesn't really break up very easily or very nicely. So eventually you're going to generate more fatigue than you can scrub in that 1 week. So having every, third development block be 2 weeks instead of 1 week is another way to handle that. And then that way you can run the low specificity pivot coming out of the development block, scrub the fatigue, and then run the high specificity pivot style block week right before the next development block, so you can knock some of that rust off from the movement and movement proficiency going into the development block. And that looks to be a pretty favorable way to maintain strength and get the next round of development blocks rolling, so to speak, off on a good start.
Yeah. I like that strategy. And I mean, you mentioned the risks associated with it, and I think that's important too. But pivots in general are something that don't get enough attention, even from us. I think when we talk about pivots, I know I have this tendency is I'm explaining emerging strategies from someone. The main thrust of it is the development block. The point of the development block is the development of your sport proficiency. So we spend most of the time talking about that. We kind of do this hand wavy thing where we're just the pivot, just think of it like a deload. And then, we may come back and flesh that out a little bit more. But you can spend quite a bit of attention optimizing your pivots. And I think you should. We talk about it being a level 2 thing. So if level 1 is, figuring out time to peak and figuring out exercises like the direct response type things, a pivot's going to be the level after that. The things that you do in the pivot don't necessarily directly affect your sporting result, your peak form, but it'll affect the development block, which will affect your peak form, so it's kind of one step removed, but it doesn't mean it's unimportant. It means that it's hard to figure it out. But you can spend a considerable amount of effort. Ross, that your example, I think, really illustrates nicely the kinds of things that you can think about. Well, what if we dial the stress up a little bit, change the movements around a little bit, make it a little shorter or a little longer? You're trying to balance this out so that the effect that you get from the next development block is better, so that it has this enhancing effect, or at least not a limiting effect.
Right.
And it is balancing these things like maintenance of strength, fatigue reduction, sensitivity to training. It's, you've got to balance all those things.
I think
So,
the other thing that ties into that too, that needs to be that brings, a play to this is the sustainability of it all.
yeah.
And which it could kind of open a different segue to this, but the other thought of caution tape around that approach and having that higher specificity, strength retention focused pivot is you really have to be good and diligent going into the development blocks, not overreaching. The second I overreached right out of the gate in that approach, like it just the whole development block was just crap. And
So like if you've got a development block, you're supposed to start at single at 8 RPE, and it's really more like 8.5, 9 RPE, that kind of thing.
yeah. Like it just so like for me, it just reiterates that I know like for me in my process that week 1 by 1 at 8, I'm going 7.5 because that way if I mess up, at least I have some buffer room. And if it ends up being that amazing, lights out that it's a 7, well, fucking A, let's go.
Sure. Yeah.
But it doesn't it's not sustainable if there's that overreaching aspect, and I can't recover from that overreaching if I'm doing a strength focused retention pivot block. It's a lot more unstable, so to speak.
That's a good point. So like you don't have as much like resources to meet those demands, energy,
Right.
in some of the old Russian texts, they would call it current adaptive reserves. That
Yeah.
type of, the type of whatever it is that's inside that makes you adapt to the training.
Yeah, that makes sense for sure. That's definitely, I think, a tale of caution with that style and that approach. It requires.
It highlights too, like your strategy. Something that I'm a bit guilty of, even in my own training, is to kind of end up at a default pivot, and especially once you've put some effort into it, you got this pivot and it seems like it's working, and so you pretty much always go back to it with, you might switch something up now and then, but it's pretty much a static thing, but it shouldn't be. Like what you're talking about is definitely not a static thing. You're talking about having a rotation of pivots of different styles and strategies, similarly to how you would a development block. And if you think about it through that lens, like a pivot is training too. You are adapting to it and adapting using the same mechanisms that you would adapt to a development block. So similar principles ought to apply.
I like this idea of, and I mentioned it a little bit in my case study in the classroom, but if someone so we have that heuristic of like a 1/3, the length of the development block is how long your pivot block should last. So if it's 6 weeks development, it's 2 weeks pivot. And that block length is another part of individualizing it, but it seems like a pretty good heuristic. And if it is 2 weeks, I really like kind of what it sounds like what Ross is saying, where the first week is more of a pivot week where we do let go of some of that fatigue. We switch up the energy system. And then the second week is more of a strength maintenance focus. Whereas, 2 weeks of like a high volume, low specificity block for a lifter that is noticing that they don't retain enough strength for their development block, I think that's a really, really fun way. And by fun, I mean it's exciting that you can kind of create these, you kind of break the rules once you kind of understand them. Because when I first started using, and I think most of us, when we first started with this ES framework, changing the pivot week, if it's a 2-week pivot, it's 2-week pivot. It's not one pivot 1 week, another pivot the next. And now it seems much more obvious that if you have that ability, you should make those adjustments and you should get that next level of like, what would be better than what we're doing? And it sounds like you guys got pretty close to that, at least with Ross. John, do you have a a kind of example of how you've manipulated pivot weeks for your lifters?
Sure. So I go back to like the goals of a pivot block being at odds with one another, because I think it depends on the competition calendar where the athlete is. Because if you have an athlete who, let's say they have an upcoming meet, Ross is really awesome at this, and he did some development for me a few years ago about how to think of it this way. If you've got an upcoming meet, you need to be really thinking about the movements that bring about the greatest rate of gain, the pivots that help maintain top end strength and prevent skill decay while also reducing fatigue. But at other times of the year, the goals may shift. So if somebody just competed, they did their peak meet of the year, then doing a non-specific pivot for 2 weeks might be the right decision, because then it dissipates fatigue a bit higher, resets sensitivity. You go into your new competition calendar kind of fresh. Maybe it breaks up movement patterns that you haven't done for a while. You improve your durability. Maybe you're doing tempo work. Maybe you're working on neglected movements like or body parts like abs and doing rows and things. But one specific scenario I have is with an athlete who I did a case study on, and in this semester for emerging strategies case studies, where what we've been doing now is having him do his time to peaks 5 weeks. He has a 2-week pivot, so it kind of breaks the rule a little bit in terms of having 2 weeks of pivot versus only one. Let me backtrack for a second. The reason we kind of saw this was we noticed a top end strength loss, like what Ross was having happen, where he would start his second development block kind of regaining some ground, right? That first 2-3 weeks, he's like regaining ground. And so it's kind of hard to get that traction going. It's demotivating, all of those things. So what we've done is that first week is a bit less specific than what he would normally experience in a development block. We work in some neglected movement patterns, those kind of things. But the competition exercise still stays in. It's just at a higher rep range. And then in the second week, we're using that strategy, Mike and Ross, that you guys are using for Ross's training with the triple adenate, except we're doing 80% doubles, because he is more sensitive to peripheral stress, responds better to the central stress. And so we need to be higher on that intensity continuum for him to maintain his top end strength. What we found is that he actually gets like a net gain through the pivot. So it's been really interesting to see that. And it was really exciting to go through that this semester with the ES case studies course to show that. Going back to something you said, Mike, there's so many solutions there's so many levers you could pull, right? Like when you're making these decisions, do you increase training stress during a pivot, right? For some athletes, maybe they need more training stress during a pivot. Do you reduce the pivot length? So if somebody has a top end strength loss, do you go, okay, well, if you're doing a 6-week development block and you're doing a 2-week pivot, maybe we'll do 1-week pivot, see how it goes. Like that's a lever you could pull too. You could increase the microcycle frequency. You could say, well, if we know that, you'll peak more often throughout the year, and maybe you have one sort of down or 2 down sessions, that'll wash out in the end because you have more peaks throughout the year with a 2x microcycle. You could keep the competition exercise in to prevent skill decay, right? Like you could just keep it in during the pivots most of the time. Or you could just ratchet up the intensity during the pivots. So there's so many levers that you can pull. And I really like how you said that, sometimes we kind of go on autopilot a little bit with the pivots. And I think it's really useful to be looking at the data, seeing what happens to competition exercises before and after a pivot, going into the next development block, and then kind of seek athlete feedback on how you can optimize things.
Yeah, kind of the a heuristic that I have been using lately is just kind of stepping through those levels. Like early on, we almost do run. It's not that they're stock pivots or anything like that, but they're fairly basic, fairly typical pivots without a lot of modification, because the focus is developing those level one knowledge, But then once that stuff is established, once you feel like you've got a good handle on these are the types of things that this athlete responds well to. This kind of development cycle works. Then it's important to turn your attention to the pivot, I think, is the next logical step.
So what do you think, though? We say everything is constantly changing. The organism is constantly changing. So level 1, you find the things that work. You optimize level 2, and it all goes to shit. what
the
do you
worm
change
is turned,
then?
right? Yeah. Well, I mean, at that point, that's the difficulty, I think, with a real individualization process and training, is that it is changing all the time, and this is like the most combat sport element of powerlifting that there is. It's like if you're let's say you're in a kickboxing competition with an opponent, and you notice some opening in their defense, so you start to exploit that opening. Well, they notice you exploiting that opening and then start to defend against it. So the moment you start exploiting some opening is the moment that it starts to close. And so it becomes this dynamic process. In military tradition, they would call it the OODA loop: observe, orient, decide, and assess, or something along those lines. But it's the decision-making process, and the person with the faster decision-making process finds these weaknesses and exploits them before the opponent can close them off. This is the part of powerlifting training that's the closest to that, because you do have this kind of logical process that we can go through in terms of these different levels and things like that. But you're absolutely right that as soon as you start to exploit something at level 1, your body is adapting to it, and you're going to respond to it a bit less. So while you're focusing on level 2, your adaptations to level 1 are changing in this dynamic way. So really, you need to pay attention to all things all the time, but we know that that's not really possible either. So, I mean, it's kind of the same thing. We're using words to describe this complicated process, and it's just an imperfect fit, I think. I wish I had a more eloquent close to that, but
One of the things that makes me think about, though, Mike, is that if you orientate that level 1 stuff, and you figure out time to peak, you figure out intensity zones at work and reps at work, and that's all golden. And then you optimize the second level with the pivot block stuff, and that's all golden. And then the level 1 stuff needs to be revisited now and reworked. I wonder and suspect if the level 2 stuff would stay stable then once you reestablished a new line of level 1, if that other level 2 stuff still continues to be applicable on level 1 round 2, level 1 round 3, and so on and so forth.
Right. I mean, I would think that it wouldn't, right? Like you're gonna adapt to that too. Like, I mean, if you can adapt to something like the structure of training, and so let me clarify what I mean by adapt. I mean, if you can become less sensitive, if you can become less responsive to something like squatting every Monday, then I don't see why you couldn't also become less responsive to the stuff we're talking about for pivots. And it doesn't have to be super peripheral, super mechanistic. Like, we're not talking about like some enzymatic pathway that gets stale. Like, maybe it's that, but it doesn't have to be that. It could just be that you get bored with a thing, and then you're less attentive to it, and you're putting less effort into it. So kind of, if we're going to open it up to that level, to that degree, then kind of anything that you can pay attention to from a training standpoint, you have the opportunity to kind of get bored with and get kind of less sensitive to it in that way. So yeah, I mean, absolutely anything in pivots is subject to that. And then going beyond pivots, we're talking about like next level development blocks and sequences of development blocks and stuff like that. Yeah, all that stuff too is also subject to change. And it gets more and more difficult to figure it out to begin with. And it's also subject to change. So, I mean, there's kind of a never ending problem that is in front of us. But I mean, I think that's just the nature of adapting organisms.
Yeah. And that's what makes it fun. Makes it, it makes it fun for some people. It makes it really frustrating for others. But it can be.
I think you got to love the process, though.
Yeah.
Like, you got to, yeah.
Otherwise, it's just going to be boring. Like, if you knew, Mike, that, like, okay, this is the next program I got to run if I want to add another 5 kilos to my squat. It's like, seriously? That's it? Like, you know?
Well, like, that's the thing. Like, it doesn't even make sense that might be a thing.
Yeah.
Right? Because if you look at that and you go, well, it's kind of all laid out there, you know?
Yeah.
Like, that's like you said, if you look at that and you go, that's kind of boring. Well, then there's no way that can be optimal. Like, I don't think boring training can be optimal. Like, I think that's almost axiomatic. You know?
Yeah.
Which is funny because that ties into one of the most common questions that a lot of people on their first exposure to emerging strategies always ask, like, do people ever get bored with it? And it's like, actually, not really. It's just a different way to solve the problem, but people are still interested in trying to solve that problem and how strong are they capable of becoming. And then the other thing, like, if you get bored powerlifting training, you're probably in the wrong sport, because you're probably bored from doing SBD all the time, and you need more variety and more exercises than just SBD.
That'd be good. It could be a good question that we actually dig into, is boredom in powerlifting. There's a thing.
Right.
Just to hop out here and tell Sam, we're gonna transition smoothly into the next interview here. Find a good spot for that and just cut it.
Yeah.
So there's a few things we can go for the next question. One of my thoughts was, you mentioned want to keep it going.
Well, that's fine.
Yeah.
We're
Okay.
good.
So the next thing we could just go right into that, Ross, is like this idea of boredom, because especially with lifters that have not been, they don't know as much about RTS. They're just recently learning about emerging strategies. That's still a very common question, is like, I need more variety. That's something that I know about myself, is I need variety, which is not that it's untrue, but I think that the framework in which people have to work with when it comes to variety is a little bit narrow. And for example, I had a call yesterday and I was talking with a lifter, and that's exactly what they said. And I was like, okay, what I'm about to tell you sounds like the antithesis of what you just told me is going to work for you. But what I think we need to do is the same exact thing every week until it stops working. And it's like, he definitely looked at me and was like, because he was on the call to learn. So he looked at me, he's like, okay, I think I understand. I've heard something about that before, So he's more on board than someone that's never heard about RTS or emerging strategies, but he still hadn't dug too deep into it. And I said, well, look, you're going to get the variety that you need when you need it. And you'll know when you need it, because you'll no longer be responding well. You won't be getting stronger anymore in your program. And it's either I'm really good at selling this idea, or he was already ready to kind of hop on board with it. He had a few more questions about it. But when I told him that the variety comes with the fact that each block is a new opportunity for you to, it's almost like controlled program hopping, because most lifters, when they start out, they go from one program to the next, to the next, to the next, until they find something that works. With ES, it's like every block is a new potential opportunity to program hop. I mean, I'm pretty sure all of us, when we started, that was our process. Like, I don't even know what I would have done if I knew about this idea early on.
Well, it gets slandered a lot too, right? Like, oh, dumb newbie just hops from program to program. Like, I get that there's a way in which that's counterproductive, but I think it's also not given its due, that you do gain a lot of experience like that. And I mean, the funny thing is, like, the people who say that are also oftentimes the same people who who are like, well, the program doesn't make that big of a difference. You just got to train really hard for 10 years. So what do you care if people program hop
Yeah.
for, if it helps them train hard? So
Yeah.
I don't know. I think there's a lot of self-exploration with program hopping, and you're right that there are some ways to do it responsibly and kind of learn from the whole process and not, so yeah, I think that's a cool analogy.
I think it gets really frustrating. I know my experience with it. It's like, because every program is like the best program when you do it like that. It's like, well, this one is dumb, so I made this, let's say Chico is a dumb program. I made this one. It's so much better than that. And so, you should do this one. It's going to be much better than Chico or whatever you started with. And like, that gets really frustrating because then you're almost like idle hopping as well. You have this person that you're looking up to, and it's like, are they wrong? Like, is their system wrong because I'm using this other guy's program? And I think that kind of encourages like this weird negative conversation about training and programming in general. I know that on the forums back in the day, it was like, Chico's an idiot because I did this and I didn't get strong at all and everyone gets hurt. Or like 531 is the worst program. I actually made a video about how 531 is a horrible program. And it's like, they're not supposed to be well, maybe they are, but if you look at them as program, creative fuel, and you have a framework that allows a little bit more control, man, it could get a lot more exciting instead of who's right and who's wrong. It's like,
yeah, you can start looking at that stuff and taking inspiration from it instead of tearing it down.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the one thing that does go missing in this is that sort of next level excitement. Like, this thing that I'm about to do is the best thing in the world. Like, when you do follow more of an ES strategy, it's more like, we're going to try it and see. It's a more mature outlook, frankly, but then you do get some excitement on the back end. So whereas the program hopping strategy tends to lead toward, I'll just go ahead and make the case now that it ends up in nihilism. Don't go down that road, kids. Like, you try a bunch of programs and then you eventually figure out, hey, none of these are magic. In a ES framework, you also figure out none of these are magic, but you figure out the ones that you respond best to. Yes, none of these are magic, but these are the ones that are impactful to me. And yeah, I mean, I suppose at this point I should say that there are ways to come to that conclusion, but lots of people come to that conclusion on their own, I guess, eventually. Like, I'm joking that it ends up in nihilism. Like, some people do get pretty nihilistic about it, but it's probably more due to them than the process. But I do think like an ES process is a repeatable way to do it. It's a way that you can learn it without just kind of having to miracle it out of thin air.
And you get to take ownership of it, though, with emerging strategies. Like, it's no longer this guy or girl, whoever wrote the program. It's like, their system is the best for me. It's more like these individual parts of different systems in combination seem to allow me to hit the strongest because of who I am. I don't know how you guys feel about it, but that's how I've been thinking about my own training. It's like, I can kind of develop my own individual system for myself. And then with lifters, especially when how we communicate with them, they get to take ownership over their combination of training variables. It's like, and maybe they don't think about it like that, but when I'm writing it, it's like, okay, we've tried this kind of area of training variables, and I overlaid a strategy for one of my lifters that wanted to kind of do their own programming, and they needed a framework to go to draw from, like kind of a pool of creative options. And obviously you can go as deep as you want within each option, but I have these 4 strategy pools that I kind of draw from, and they go in order. And it's a secret that you guys don't know, but I just have this in my head now. I need to share it with you. But there's like 4 general places to draw from. The first one is like high intensity ramp up work with minimal back off volume, which is obviously derived from all the things we've already done. But it's like I start with that with a lot of lifters where it's like a triple out of 9 is their top set. Maybe they do a down set and it's, another triple, but there's not a whole lot of volume. And you just hit that top set and you kind of move on to the next exercise and the next lift and then the next day. The second one is I call the middle ground, where you're still doing ramp up work. You're not doing a whole lot of volume, but a lot of the volume is coming from the main work. So you're doing like anywhere from like a triple to a set of 6 at a 9, ramping up to that for your competition lift. And then the SDEs are like sets of 4 to sets of 8 at a 9. And then the supplemental or SPEs are sets of 8 to sets of 12, again ramping up. So there's not a lot of polarization. Everything's kind of stacked in the middle. You get all the rep ranges across the different exercises, and that's strategy 2. And then strategy 3 is a strict, like relatively strict polarized approach where you have one top set and then a lot of the volume's coming from that 70 to 80% back off work, and you're doing, well, you can do sets of 5, sets of 3, whatever, but the volume is kind of the average intensity of 75%. And again, you go from competition lift, SDE assistance lift, where the SDEs are maybe repeating very similar protocols as the top set, but the back off work again is in that lower intensity rep range. And you can pretty much take that idea and run with it for the SPEs, but AMRAP work and things like that tend to fall in line with that polarization. And the polarization with the SPEs comes from low specificity. So low specificity exercise and low specificity percentage, meaning it's a way if like high intensity is also correlated with higher specificity, which it isn't, but in this context, the polarization comes there. And the fourth one is effectively mixing and matching from the high intensity and the polarization, where maybe you do some ramp up work, you get a little bit more density in that higher intensity range, and then the volume is still coming from low intensity. And then you can keep going down that and just kind of mix and match as much as you want. But if you have those 4 ideas in there, now you have options in every different category to draw from and kind of create some of your own training principles. And I don't know where we're going to go with this convo now, but this idea is something that's kind of been building. It's like, well, where do you go next when you're trying to find that thing that works? It's like, I think these are pretty good, some cool places to draw from.
So a couple of things that you're saying, Jim, that I wanted to comment on are, you have to have a place to start. And that's the hardest part, right? Like, I was going to go through my process for a moment when I get a new athlete. Now, the strategy you're talking about is like having like a couple of different ideas that you could reach from, that you could start someone on, watch their response, and then pivot and do something different. I do something a little bit different, which is during an athlete call. So this is new athlete. I ask, well, tell me about your training over the past year. Tell me about what you've done. Tell me about what you like. Tell me about what you don't like. Where do you think you benefit the most? What rep range? What intensity? What RPE? What movements? How do you lay out your training week? If you've done 5-3-1, if you've done Chico, if you've done, I don't know, any other one of those kind of programs that you could buy as a template, what did you like about it? And where did you notice the best results coming? And there's a couple of reasons why I do that. Now, you could approach the situation and think the person is not an expert in themselves, right? Like, so you could approach that and say, this person is not their best critic. They're not an expert in themselves. You're going to have a better sense of it because you're putting them on the system that's built, Emerging Strategies is built to weed out all the noise and look at the signal. So sometimes you get people and they have no idea, right? So you could take that belief structure and then now you as the coach, you're inserting your ideas and watching the response. I take a different approach, which is that I believe this person's an expert in themselves, and I have nothing else to add to this conversation in the way of data to argue against it or to present another argument. So I approach it such that this athlete is an expert in themselves. They know what they enjoy, they know what they don't enjoy. And for a first development block, that's the place to start. So then we do the development block and we watch and we see what happens. If the training stress is too much, they tell you, hey, I'm feeling beat up, I'm not recovered, right? Okay, so that informs your decision making. You can see from your estimated 1RM charts, hey, are they getting better? Are they getting worse? When do they peak? Then you do an athlete call, and this is my process, is to say, well, what did you like? What didn't you like? What's your start, stop, and continues? And then to move from there, if I have ideas, that's the time, right? That's the time to say, well, what if we tried this? Or what if we tried that? Now, in a perfect world, you have 12 months before you ever do a competition with someone, right? Where you could just explore like crazy and figure out what's next. But the reality is you get people and you got 4 weeks, right? Ross, when you and I were talking, and this is when I first came on RTS, you were like, now, this is the process to follow when you get a new athlete, except for when you get someone who has to compete in 4 weeks. So then it's like you're almost entirely relying on their experience, right? Like you don't have time to explore. You don't have time to figure out their time to peak. You don't have time to do these other things. And you're just going to go with that athletic history. And so that's the thing that I love about emerging strategies, is that it honors the fact that if someone was program hopping from 531 to Chico to anything else, that's data. And that's a good place to start. And then what's cool about it is when you run reports and you look at the athlete response, that informs your decision making for what works, what doesn't work, and what could you explore.
Yeah. Our friend Jacob Sipkin, we were talking about something like this a while ago, and he mentioned, like, why would you skip out on a chance to just generate a huge amount of athlete buy-in? Like if they're there telling you, hey, this is what has worked for me in the past, why would you say, no, I know better, even though I've never met you, I've never talked to you before or anything like that? Like, I know better because I'm me. Like you have this opportunity to generate a lot of buy-in to the program, being like, yeah, this is the thing that works well for you. Well, we're gonna at least incorporate it, at least blend it into the strategy that, into this framework, and this is how it's going to feed in to, our long-term understanding of what works for you, and how we're going to generate this picture.
Yeah, I think the athlete buy-in also helps with that level of boredom that we're talking about. Like, I find it more exciting as an athlete when I trust that my coach is listening to me and will change the program and kind of be motivated to pay attention when we need to change it. Whereas if you're an athlete kind of on your own, I feel like there's always this level of uncertainty of, are you doing the right thing? When do I need to change this up? Am I doing something that's going to hurt me? Things like that I think having a coach or just someone to kind of give you some feedback, like, that's super valuable. And if you're doing this on your own, because a lot of people ask, can you do emerging strategies on your own? Like, I think you can, for sure, like 100%. It's just, you need to be ready to like kind of take that coach's perspective on your own training. And I think if you do that, it's really hard for emerging strategies to get boring, because I think the focus shifts to what matters, and then you're like, wait, how could I be bored? I'm getting stronger. This is sick. I'm going to keep doing this.
Like long-term bored.
Yeah.
No, I do think there are some people that there are people that are going to get bored with, kind of repeating the same rep range every week. But, there's a solution for that as well. Like, you don't have to dump all the benefits that you could get with a more controlled use of variation. One thing that comes to mind for me is if you use like a half frequency, so a way to think about half frequency is like an A week and a B week. And then you just structure it A, B, A, B, A, B, and there's a bit more to it than that, which, maybe we can get into, but the idea is that the A week and the B week are different, and if we're talking about comp lifts, they're going to be different rep ranges, different protocols, the same exercise. So you're only repeating something once every 2 weeks, and surely you can't feel like you can just never repeat the same thing like that. That doesn't make sense to me. So it's like find the rhythm where you can repeat things and feel okay about it, and half frequency for those people is probably the gateway drug, because I think if you do that for a little while, and there's definitely some benefits, but there's some drawbacks to half frequency too. You've got to come up with a lot more variations, and then in the next block you've got to come up with more variations, and the blocks take longer. You get bigger peaks, but they do take longer. It's harder to manage your competition schedule. It's hard to peak on time, especially if you've got competitions in close proximity to each other. So I think you can start there, and then you'll find like, I think it'd be okay if I just did fives for every week for 3 weeks, and then we'll change to something else. I mean, that's the other thing, is it might be the open-endedness of it that is unsettling to people. Like, wait, we're just going to keep doing fives? Like, what if this goes on for 6 months? Like, relax, it won't. And especially if you're afraid of that, it's going to be like 3 weeks, and then we're going to need to do something else.
We hope that you found this conversation on pivot blocks interesting, informative, and hopefully provided some creative fuel to build and write your own pivot blocks for long-term strength gains. Now let's turn our attention to this week's interview with RTS lifter Amanda Allen and her coach, John Garofano.
So Amanda, I'm really excited to get a chance to talk with you and have you talk with our listeners about who you are, because you're an awesome lifter, and it's been a really big pleasure of mine to be able to work with you and see you progress in the few years we've worked together. And I was hoping today that you could share with us just a little bit about you and how you got into lifting weights. I know you have a pretty eclectic background. You've done a lot of different things, and I think it would be really cool for our listeners to hear a little bit about that and what got you into powerlifting. So I don't know, what got you to pick up the weights and lift them in the first place?
Oh man. Well, I guess I should start with maybe my athletic background a little bit. So I've been an athlete my whole life. At the age of 5, I was a shy kid. My mom was like, "You're going to pick a sport. It can be anything, but you have to pick something." And I just fought her, man. I did not want to do that. So I picked soccer, actually. And that turned out to be a good choice. I played competitive soccer my whole life, from 5 through high school, and was on a traveling team. I was a striker. I was a forward. So speed was my gift, I think. And then I had foot surgery in high school from soccer injury. So then I kind of just took a break. And I actually started going to college when I was 16. Didn't fit in so well in high school. Didn't like it. So I made a deal with my mom that she said, if you start college the next day, you can go. So I got my driver's license, started going to school, got my groove with that. And then I decided, at that point, I hadn't been doing sports for quite some time. And I ended up, just for fun, taking the soccer class. I'm like, oh, this will be an easy grade. I'm into it. And the coach asked me to be on the team. So then I ended up playing collegiate soccer and really like making my first, as an adult, return back to sport and fitness. And then I just had a long hiatus from, I'm a registered dietitian, and that program's super demanding. The amount of work that you need to do for like chemistry classes and science, it was a lot. So I just focused on my career, got going in my career. And I hit a point, I was in my 20s, and I was just out of shape. I was heavier than I'd ever been. I wasn't really doing any physical activity. And I thought, okay, I need to do something. So this is when CrossFit got its rage, started, getting its rage. And I didn't know what CrossFit was, but I went to a gym. So that was my first introduction to barbell training. I did not know what to expect, and man, I was out of shape. but really fast, within a few months, I was just seeing so much progress, learning that's the first time I ever did squats, ever tried a deadlift, and I loved it. So I ended up quickly getting in really peak condition, and starting to compete casually, just local meets and stuff for CrossFit. Did pretty well. And then I kind of made another shift. I really sucked at snatch and clean and jerk. So like the Olympic lifts were my weakness. So I decided, okay, I need to become better at this. So I sought out a coach for weightlifting and in Sacramento. So it was about an hour from where I lived, but it is where I work. So I would take kind of one-on-one lessons from him. And he said, you should join the team. And I thought, but I couldn't even get into a overhead squat position. My mobility is like classic power lifter mobility. Like I cannot move. So it took just so much practice to even be able to get into positions for that. But I ended up staying with that team for 4 years, I think, 3 or 4 years, and competing with that. And at that time, I loved Olympic weightlifting. It was a passion of mine, but I never felt like I could really express my own strength, like my true raw strength. I knew I had a ton of potential and I knew I was really strong, but really limited by technique, because you need to dedicate 10 years to Olympic weightlifting to be any good, I think. So the coach and I don't know, powerlifting and Olympic lifting have like very different cultures. And the weightlifting crew just looked at the powerlifting crew and was like, they're not athletic. They're a different animal, And I think we finally broke that barrier because the coach and we thought, well, I think I had an injury. I think I fractured my wrist doing clean and jerk. And had to modify things. So we decided just to let me just go at it and really just get it out of my system with the strength. And we trained a really short time. We said, let's sign up together and we'll do a powerlifting meet. Neither one of us knew how to bench press. We didn't know how to do anything. I didn't know what a sumo deadlift was. It was a lot. So we signed up at Santa Cruz Strength, which is a really awesome gym in California. And I didn't try to make weight or anything. I just was like, I'm going to roll in and just try this. So I think I entered as a 72 kilo lifter. I was the pipsqueak, but I was, went for it. But man, we killed it. I mean, at the time, we didn't know what we were doing at all. We had no clue. And we timed our warm-ups like Olympic lifters do. We had that all down, but it was definitely not what power lifters do. It was completely different. We were not in our element. But I ended up getting best lifter for that day. And then we were like, sweet, we qualified for nationals. And we didn't even know what nationals was or anything. So that was pretty funny. So that really sparked it for me. I was hooked at that point. I thought, if I could do that with minimal training, really, let's see what I could do if I really dedicated myself to this. So
it's a cool first start.
Back.
That's a cool first start into powerlifting, is becoming best lifter at your first meet.
I know, right?
Most people are excited to have their first 3 squats, white lighted. Actually, I'm really curious, just before you jump into the next part, is how did you pass all the rules, to get.
Okay, so I love that question, because my coach told me, well, we didn't know that there were we became aware that there were all these powerlifting federations, but we didn't know what any of them were. We had no clue. All we knew, because we come from USA weightlifting background as the federation, right? So drug-free, it's the highest standard. So we thought we need to find the equivalent of USA weightlifting. So we ended up choosing USA powerlifting. That's the only reason, that I ended up in that federation. So we just knew we wanted it to be high standards, drug-free sport, tested and all of that. So it's hard because California doesn't really have hardly any USAPL meets. You got to search for them. There's USPA.
Yeah.
That is much bigger here. So we practiced probably for about a week before. Coach said, by the way, people call me Mandy as my nickname. So he said, Mandy, we should probably practice the rules. So we took a couple sessions of squats, and he gave me the command, and then I did that for him, and then we did the same with the bench press. But we might have practiced that for 1 week, maybe. So I did get some technical fouls. I remember not pausing on my bench press, and I got a no lift. And Coach, you'd be happy to know that my squats were to depth. So
that weightlifter, you can't squat high as a weightlifter, can you? Like, do they let that happen ever?
It doesn't matter where. So I was always doing power clean and jerks or power cleans because I have a hard time with mobility. But it totally counts.
Yeah.
As long as you get it to your shoulders and overhead, you're golden. So,
you're used to hitting depth though, like with your training when you're squatting.
Yes. Yeah, years of snatch and clean and jerk over and over again. Your depth, like my mobility did a 180. It was so good at that time. So after that, I said, okay, let's see what we got. This is fun. I want to see where it can go with this. So I decided, I think it was within the next 3 or 4 months after that first meet, to compete again at the same gym at a different meet as a 63 though. And so I got my weight down, and I felt like I did a little homework, and I felt like that would be, because as a weightlifter, we had, my weight class was 69 kilos. So I thought, this is where I land. So went back. I got best lifter again. I was stoked. I was like, yeah. And my total went up, and I was starting to get more technically sound, but still didn't know what I was doing at all. Didn't have any powerlifting equipment. Didn't know you needed a special kind of belt. Like, I had no idea. So that was my motivation to go back and requalify as a 63 was to go to the following year's Raw Nationals. So I qualified again, and then that's where I feel like my powerlifting path really launched off. So then I transitioned away from the weightlifting team to dedicate my training to powerlifting and really try to learn how to do it. But there weren't really any, I came from teams, right? Like I was on a team, and you had all of this support system, and in the area that I live, there's some really fantastic powerlifting culture and gyms and some amazing mentors, but they weren't in my geographic region. Like it wasn't close enough to get to after work or whatever. So slowly I started building up my home gym and just also renting out a corner in a CrossFit gym. And I would just train alone that entire year. And I didn't have a coach. I didn't have any guidance. So I got really lucky because I have to give a huge shout out and thank you to Silent Mike, Michael Farr in Sacramento, because he took me under his wing. He does the Kaizen training program. But we were friends. He actually was the one who gave me a bench press lesson and a deadlift lesson. We had 2 sessions, and that's how I learned how to do it. So he would give me my programming, and he helped me out for almost a year, just giving me, telling me what my exercises were for the week, and then helping me with that. But it really wasn't an actual coach. It was just, he was helping get me ready. So I ended up going to that nationals. It was 2018 Raw Nationals in Spokane. And that was one of the craziest experiences I've ever had. It was so intimidating and so fun. But again, like I rolled in, I brought my friend who is not a power lifter, doesn't know anything about it except for he helps me with my bench press handoffs. Trained him well on that. So
He
I
does
went
a
with
very good job.
I went with no coach, no handler. I didn't know anyone. And I had never traveled out of state for a meet before. That was a whole new, threw in a whole nother dynamic at the same time. So I put together my best plan. So my friend, I said, okay, you need to be my runner to go look at the, what do you call it? The leaderboard, the scoreboard, the board, right?
Yeah.
I'm like, you need to tell me how many people out I am. Well, it turned out he had cataracts that we didn't know about, so he couldn't see.
Oh.
Yeah. So
your
I
friend.
was yeah.
Oh.
So I was running from my warm-up platform across the ballroom to try to look at the board because I didn't know you could get a cool app, the lifting app, to just look at it. I had no idea. Isabella was the one who saved my ass. She saved my friend's ass, because I told him he had to help load the plates, but he didn't know how to do that. And Isabella took over for him and helped me load my bar.
Shout out.
She saved the day.
Shout out to Isabella. That's awesome.
Shout out Isabella.
She saved the day. That was the first time I saw the RTS. That's the first time I learned who RTS was. I had no idea.
So what you're saying is that the shirts were effective.
The marketing worked.
Good job,
Ross.
marketer.
Yeah, totally. So I tried to time my warm-ups. I fucked it all up. It was a total shit show. I remember all of a sudden the entire ballroom was empty. And you had to go up a flight of stairs to the platform behind the curtain. Well, Mike's sitting there and he goes, well, Amanda, I noticed that the ballroom's empty but I'm not done with my warm-up sets on the squat yet. And I'm like, shit, what do I do? So I sprinted up the staircase and I got into and they had been calling my name for like a while.
Oh no.
And I almost missed my opener.
Oh.
And I ran. So I had taken my first squat or my last warm-up probably 30 seconds before I did my first lift on the platform. And
Wow.
I can't remember. I think I smoked that one though. I was stoked. I was like, okay, weightlifting is I still am in good weightlifting shape. So then the meet took off and it was difficult the whole day. But I felt like that was like such a huge accomplishment just to get through it and learn how a powerlifting, like a national level meet is run. I learned so much from that experience. Never want to do that again, but I learned a lot. So I think I ended up placing 11th at that national meet, which in the 63.
I'll look it
class.
up. I'll look it up.
I think
Open powerlifting.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, that's not a bad first start for not knowing what you're doing.
For sure.
That's like the most competitive class, I feel like, in the women's group, one of them.
It's a very competitive class. And what's really cool to me hearing your story is just how much adversity you overcame to kind of get yourself there. And the emphasis on how competitive you were given your lack of experience, and knowledge. Mm-hmm. And I think it's really cool to hear how your story was kind of shaped to bring you into powerlifting. Now, looking at powerlifting, what do you think you enjoy the most about powerlifting now that you've been doing it for a few years?
That's a tough question. I just think, like, I really know that I want to give it, because I'm an older lifter, right? So I'm 38 years old and competing against primarily like 20-something-year-olds. And I know I have another solid 5 years of being a high-level lifter in me. And I think that I just really want to see what my potential is in this, because I still feel like at this age I'm still really competitive. I think I can hold my own. So I don't think it's over for me, but I think the thing I love the most about powerlifting is that, I mean, it's my therapy. It's my zen. I'm fortunate that I have a home gym. That's very fortunate, but I know I can just go out in the garage and I can just be away from it all. And even if I don't feel like training, the second I do it, I always feel really good. I always have some kind of like accomplishment with getting over a self-talk, mental barrier, strength barrier. I don't know. I just love it.
What's interesting to me is how, you know, you just mentioned that powerlifting for you and lifting weights is a release and it's something you enjoy. And kind of talking a little bit more about adversity, you had some significant adversity this past year, right?
Mm-hmm.
Thinking about your health that you've had to overcome. And I don't know if you want to talk about that a little bit, about some of the stuff that you had to overcome there and how you almost
Yeah,
gave me a heart attack.
I know. Yeah, I'm totally happy to share. So I have always had these. Well, I should start by like backing up. We were training hard for the 2019 Arnold. And we were on point. We were killing it. The momentum was building. Everything was planned. I was registered. It was on, and I was excited because it was going to be our second time together competing. And since I was in my 20s, and I remember it started in CrossFit, and then a few times when I'm training for weightlifting, it would happen. I was getting these heart palpitations, mostly when I drank too much caffeine. So I just thought, oh, it's caffeine, no biggie. So I was at work one day, and luckily I work at a big medical center, and I work in a cardiac unit. But I was at the gym for doing a little lunch bodybuilding session. And I had my heart rate went off. So anyway, I crawled to the ICU where I work, and they were amazing. And they had to go to the ER. And I knew when there was like 20 staff members and doctors waiting for my arrival, I knew this was an emergency. So anyway, just randomly, I got diagnosed with a rare condition called Wolff-Parkinson-White syndrome, where you have a little bit of an extra electrical pathway, and your heart rate, your heart electricity gets stuck in a loop. So anyway, the Arnold ended up having to be canceled because it wasn't safe to be on an airplane if something happened. And I asked the doctor, the cardiologist, well, here's all the things that happen getting ready for weightlifting. We have dieting, stress, strenuous exercise, shit tons of caffeine, like water loading, water dehydration. Is it okay if I go? And he was like, you're crazy. You can't go. You can't. So sadly, we had to cancel that. And that was right before the COVID situation. So I got really lucky that I was able to have my heart procedure to fix it done right before all the hospitals and elective things got shut down, or this would have been a long road. So I'm totally fixed. I'm healed, and they said it's resolved now. So that was all good.
Yeah, that was definitely a scary time. Like when that was all going down, you and I were chatting about it, and you put a ton of work into prepping for the Arnold this year, and it was a big bummer to not do it. But obviously, your health comes first. You mentioned that this was going to be our second time working together for one of your meets. Maybe the listeners could benefit hearing about kind of what led you to RTS for coaching and what it's been like working with me.
Yeah, definitely. So I will say that any setback, like not being able to go to the Arnold, not being able to compete, I love to compete. I love being a competitor. That's I love that. A lot of lifters do it for the joy. I also do, but I love to compete. So it wasn't that much. I mean, it was a bummer, but I just see, like, with the COVID situation and my heart procedure, and everyone's going through this with with the COVID issues, but everything is an opportunity. So I never see this as like, oh, it's the last meet. It never is. Or, oh, I can't go to the gym. I'm having to do body weight training at home or whatever. It's always an opportunity to focus on something else. So I kind of just got excited that there was that we could work on other things. So to answer your question, Isabella introduced me to RTS. But when I finished, so I did the Arnold in 2019.
Would have been 19. Yep.
19, yes. And I was still in that same boat of not having really any guidance, not really having someone to help. I don't know. I still didn't know what I was doing. So after the Arnold, I just said, okay, if you really want to do this, you need to find a mentor. You need to find a support system. And I know I'm strong, but I haven't really studied or learned powerlifting technique very much. So up until that time, so I said, if I'm going to go to the next level, I think, because at that Arnold, I think I got second place in that competition. But my limiting factor is I didn't have the guidance or the technical improvement that I think I needed to take me up to the next level. So I just got back, and then I said, okay, the goal is to find a coach. And I had no idea where to start. And I just started Googling it. I'm kind of an introvert by nature. So I know networking is one of the most valuable things that you can do. But as a kind of a quiet person, that's sometimes hard to reach out on like Instagram or something to ask for help. But I said, I know I need help, and I have to just ask the other lifters that were at the meet what they're doing, or if they have a recommendation. Just I needed somewhere to get started. So after doing a lot of homework and just looking at the pros and cons and like the coaching philosophy and structure of the different, the major powerlifting coaching companies that are available, I ended up choosing RTS because I thought it was one thing that I really wanted to work on was to become a more educated is not the word I'm looking for, but maybe become a more a lifter who can be more skilled in making smart training decisions and have more auto regulation and the ability to know how to almost guide my own decisions a little bit, instead of just having someone prescribe, this is your workout for the day, this is the percent weight you need to lift, so you need to lift 350 pounds for this many times today. That's what I had always done. And I wanted something more than that. I wanted something. First of all, I had a very bad experience with some guidance that was not evidence-based. And it was the most important priority when I selected a coach, that whatever philosophy that they had or what they based their coaching on, it had to be, I'm a scientist myself, so everything has to be evidence-based and based in science or outcome-based. And I felt like RTS was the company that was going to be able to do that for me. I like how analytical it seemed. I like how I had no idea what RPEs were, but I was like, I like the sound of that. That sounds like it's going to meet my goal. Let's see. I don't know, but I was very skeptical about online coaching. Again, I had always come from team-based things, and I like in-person interaction. I like to have a really strong relationship with my coach, personal relationship. So I was fearful and skeptical about online coaching. And I thought, how in the world are they going to look at my video and know, how are they going to know me or my tendencies or my traits or what makes me tick? And it freaked me out to think about going to a meet with somebody I didn't know. And what are they going to know, that I like trap slaps before I walk out on the platform? No, it was scary. So I was like, well, I knew I had an upcoming vacation, because I love to travel. It's, besides lifting weights, it's my favorite thing to do in the whole world, is to travel the world. So I thought, well, I have this little gap in time. Let me just sign up for RTS and see, maybe I can just do a focused, I forget how long it was, a month or two or something, and just get some
5
of my
weeks.
5 weeks. Exactly.
Not that I didn't know that number off the top of my head.
Okay. So I thought, well, this is a good opportunity where I'm going to get some professional help, and I'm just going to really have them help me during these 5 weeks before I go travel. And then when I come back from traveling, which is usually a month at a time, then I'll just start training again for nationals. And I wasn't really worried about it. And so I think, I was impressed with I was a little bit nervous, who am I going to get? And it had the option of being able to request a coach. But I was like, no, let me just see who I'm going to get. I just wanted to I thought, no, I just want to see where I land. And I like that there was the personality test. And I'm like, oh, this is dumb, but this is fun also because it's sciencey and it's like an experiment. So anyway, I landed with you, John. We got matched.
Wow.
I know.
What a match it's been.
It has.
And it's funny because I didn't know that you were testing me for 5 weeks, right? And so now I get the full part of the story. I wonder if I would have made the same decisions, wondering oh no, she's testing me for 5 weeks and she might sign off, So I think it's really interesting to hear that.
I've never told you that until today.
No, I did not know that.
Well,
That's
aren't you
funny.
always testing people that you commit to right away?
For sure.
Yeah.
Isn't it always a test every day, even?
Absolutely.
Because you have to build trust with John, right? And obviously all the clients, it's all about the relationship. It sounds like relationship is something that's really important. They mentioned the trap slaps.
Right.
I think that's so funny because it's with online coaching, especially, it sounds like there's a lot of fear around oh no, how am I gonna know if my coach knows? And then I'm curious about this because when did you realize that John would in fact know that you trap slaps before going out?
Oh, we talked about it. So one thing John's really good about. Can I jump to meet day?
Yeah.
Because meet day was so amazing. So again, I had a really a not positive experience leading up to this, and first of all, I'm Sicilian. I'm blonde, so you wouldn't know this. But I'm Sicilian, and we are very distrustful by nature. I don't want to generalize, but my family is. So I'm already skeptical of everyone, and the experience I had just sort of ingrained that even further. So
you mean prior to you and I working together?
Yeah. Mm-hmm, yeah. So I didn't have a lot of confidence that an online coach, a stranger, I didn't have that much confidence that was going to work out. So I just look at it as opportunity. I have 5 weeks. Let me see if I can learn as much as I can. And then I'll figure out how to go do nationals again, somehow. That's kind of where I was. So leading up to after that 5 weeks, our training, we were just barely scratching the surface, and I was already having a blast with it. I was already seeing improvement. It was a big learning curve for me because, again, I had never had to log my training on an electronic log before. So I was trying to get used to the training log. I had no idea how to rate an RPE. I just learned that, I think, finally, after a year. So And then, there was just there was a huge learning curve, but I was already seeing major benefit. So at that point I thought, you know what, because let's be realistic. Coaching is expensive and it has to provide the value, right? And I was already in that month seeing major value. And I said, this is worth my money because I'm already having such a good experience. John and I had already started having a fantastic rapport. Our communication was like on point. It was seamless. Everything about it was positive. So I came back from vacation. I had a blast, but lost a lot of strength. Where did I go, John? I can't even remember. Was I in Ireland? Scotland? Spain?
It was Spain.
Spain.
Yep.
Okay, so I drank tons of wine. I ate so much cheese. I had the best time. And then I came back. I'm like, shit, I got to cut weight. I got a lot to lose. I got to get all the strength back. So anyway, fast forward to going to 2019 Raw Nationals in Lombard, Illinois. So everything that I was nervous and I thought, I just don't know if I could trust someone to do my handling. I don't know how to do it myself, so I'm just hoping for the best. But we had talked things out. We had talked the details out before. So I think our communication is really the highlight. We already hashed it all out, like what creates anxiety for me as an athlete on meet day. What were lessons I learned from the year before when I was trying to do it myself? Like I knew I kind of bonked. I had a whole cooler full of snacks. I'm a dietitian. I love snacks. I thought it all out, brought the Gatorade, but I was so busy. I didn't fuel that whole day the year before. And I bonked out on deadlift. So we had already, John
that's
and I.
That's why you had me be your food handler also.
Yes, you were my snack captain.
Snack
Can you get a shirt
captain.
for me, Jim? Jim, I want snack captain shirt.
Oh,
please.
that's such
Thank
a
you.
good one. What?
Yeah.
You're great with names and things like this. You got the podcast name. You already gave yourself a nickname. You got John a nickname now.
Yeah, John, I know that doesn't sound that sexy, but he was the snack captain. We had already planned it though, because that was something that I knew that I would be nervous or stressed or forget or whatever. So we planned out fueling times, drinking times, caffeine dosing times, optimal pee break opportunities. Like everything was already laid out, and my anxiety going into it, I was calm. I was so calm because I knew I was in good hands. But the test came, right, day of. Our communication was impeccable. We met the day before, and then it was the morning time. Oh, I should rewind. Like, you even came, John, with me to, like, make sure. I could have done it on my own, but you were like, no, I'll go with you. Make sure I knew my rack heights. Just everything that just needed some extra support. I felt like you were there for me, and it was so seamless. So it was meet day. And again, like, I'm an introverted person, maybe get, like, a little overstimulated. So we even strategized. I don't even think we had a conversation about this, but you were so in tune. I feel like we were so in tune that you found me a nice quiet place to do my warm-ups, become in the moment, and I wasn't in the big warm-up room with all the stimulation. And then it was just go time, and then we just killed it. Like, warm-ups were so perfectly timed. It required minimal discussion for, like, attempt selections, and you just nailed it. I mean, we talked, but I needed you to make a decision, and you made really good decisions. Everything about it, I felt like, was flawless.
It's so cool to hear your experience from kind of this side of it, hearing what you enjoyed and hearing what was beneficial for you. And that's always the goal, right? Like, Jim, you can relate to this. You always want your lifter to have the best performance on meet day. You want them to feel like they can be themselves without all the additional stress, right? Like, I always think about that for me. Like, how cool would it be if I had, like, Mike standing next to me figuring out what to load on the bar, and he goes, nope, I got it, I'm loading the bar for you. Like how much better my performance would be, right? And so it's really cool to hear your perspective here.
I have to say too, like again, my experience before was lifting as an individual with not a support system. And I had never met the rest of the RTS crew except for Isabella that one time. I felt just, I remember a lot of stress the year before trying to, being solo and trying to ask, like, can I share a platform for warm-ups? And there was like teams there with coaches. And I mean, even like you said, we're going to have a space, we're going to lock down. Like, you don't need to worry about it. And then I just remember Mike being there, and he's got that glow in his eye. Mike has a twinkle in his eye, and he's just so soothing to be around and so encouraging. And like LS came in, and he's got the beats going. It was so fun, and I felt like finally again, I felt like I was part of a team. And I felt like I had a support system that I didn't have before, even though none of us live in the same geographic location, or even though it's online coaching, I felt like I had personal connection with everyone. And it was really awesome. And I never saw you sweat. My grandfather used to say, don't let them see you sweat. And like, you were managing, you were strategizing, right? You're like checking out the room, checking out the board. You knew where we were ranked. But you never let it show. You were always calm, collected, and very decisive. And I thought that really made the day fantastic.
That's really awesome. Jim, you were going to say something.
I was just going to hop in and add to the meet day aspect of coaching, because I know, Amanda, it sounds like the biggest test was, okay, yeah, you can put this face on when we're online. You're not saying this, I'm paraphrasing or maybe even extrapolating here, but it's like you can put a test on when it's the internet, but when we meet, what's it going to be like? Is it going to be like it is in person? And like my own experience, the meet day is like my favorite day of my coaching. All the meets I've ever been to as a coach with RTS has always been just like that, where it's like, yeah, this is the opportunity where I either am a clown, or it's just awesome and I can help my lifter do as well as they can. The other thing you mentioned is just like how you have had negative experiences, and we don't need to dig into that, but I really like that trap comment, and I'm referring to it again because I've seen, I think some people come into the coaching world and they think they just jump in with their model and then they apply it with every lifter to the platform. And it's like, the platform is the most personal day that you can have as a coach and athlete. Like, you probably, you're a strong lifter, Amanda, and you know what you want. So like, how about we just ask, and then like John, it sounds like, was able to take over the things that you didn't even know you needed, like the extra support, being able to provide snacks and just have that community that I guess you were looking for. And so I just wanted to kind of throw that in there, is like, it's something that as coaches online, if people are listening to this, like, meet day is really your time to shine. And if you care, it's pretty obvious. I think, like, it's like we only have a few a handful of lifters that we're working with. So it's so cool that we can just, everyone chips in, and especially in Spokane, in Lombard, that was like a all hands on deck type of day, which is pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. And I think, yeah, I love that you said that, Jim, because that was something that John and I, on one of our meetings that we had leading up, John, you were very specific. You said, what do you expect or need from me on meet day? And it wasn't a guessing game. We had already strategized that in advance. That was already a major detail that was already discussed. So, some, like you said, some lifters have it, they get internally, they're able to arouse themselves to be able to lift heavy. Some people need more outward encouragement or vocalization, and it's these questions, I feel like, John, you ask, and I think the RTS as a coaching model, you guys do really well, and it's a skill. I'm a dietitian who counsels athletes also, so it's like, I know how hard that skill is to learn, to ask the right question at the right time. And what those questions have helped me with is stopping and taking a minute to be more reflective. Not just do what's prescribed on the program and hope for the best. It's like the questions are forcing me to think about myself as an athlete or as a person, because I'm so busy, I would never normally stop to do that. And so it's like, I don't know, what do I need on meet day? I haven't even thought about it. And so now I will, like, through those questions and experience and dialogue, we start to learn how to communicate better and have the most success on meet day. So that's been really helpful.
It's interesting you say that, because it brings to mind two things that I was thinking. The first one is, so I did a case study on you this semester for RTS Classroom, the case study scores. And what was really cool about that experience was going back to the very first time that you and I met and looking at your goals and the things that you wanted to achieve. And one of the things that you said was that you wanted to become a more reflective lifter.
Oh,
You
good.
wanted
I
to-
said that. Good.
Yes, it was actually written down, like I wrote it, like the date and time. And you said that you wanted to learn more about yourself, that you wanted to understand like what you respond to, what you don't respond to. And it's really cool to hear you say that the questions that I asked helped you to get that experience, right? And Jim, I'm sure you can relate to this, that one of the goals with coaching is we want our lifters to become more self-aware, because that just makes the coaching experience so much better. We can make so many better decisions when the athlete is more self-aware
and
you know?
engaged in the process of learning. I mean, Amanda, the fact that you even
Mhm.
wrote that down on your goals is like, that's pretty cool. Because I think obviously it's good to become more self-aware, but the desire to want that is well, it's going to make it more likely to happen. Like bringing awareness to the awareness, you know.
I feel like if you want the most out of your coach, right, you have to be, you need to participate more than they do. You have to put the work in more than they do in terms of it's for you, right? So you need to be an equal participant in like helping foster that and development. Since just starting like the RTS Classroom series, John really encouraged me to watch those and listen to them. And, I'm not a coach, so I felt like, well, I don't know. But I started diving in. That has helped me be very reflective and understand the why behind why what we're doing. It's a lot easier to have buy-in if you understand, why are you doing this exercise? Why are you focusing on, these? I had never done pin exercises or pause things. I had never done any of that. So now understanding like what it actually, again, going back to the evidence base, what's the reason, the rationale for this? It's a lot easier to have really engaged conversations with the coach, and it's easier to have buy-in to why you're doing what you're doing. And if you think it's bullshit, then it's easier to say, I think this one's bullshit and I don't want to do that. Because I know, Jim, you hate your Bulgarian split squats.
You know. How do you know? What do I talk about
I
a lot
know
or something?
this. But you know what? They work. So
who's talking about me behind my... Just kidding.
I kind of like it when my lifters talk to one another, because they convince each other to do Bulgarian split squats. So Amanda, please continue with Jen.
John prescribed me upright rows this week, so I don't know. We're going to see if I do those. The last time he prescribed me something and I told him I don't want to do it, I convinced myself that I needed to do it because I didn't like that I was denying myself the opportunity from learning about Zercher squats.
That's what it was. No, that was what I was thinking that you hated. I know.
I also hate Bulgarians, to be fair. Though I think most of that is the fact that I sit down way more than I used to. So like split squats seem more psychologically intimidating.
Because your hips are tight?
Yeah, something like that. I don't know, because when I'm walking a lot more, the split squats are, this is such a weird thing, but split squats are closer to walking than bilateral, normal squats are to sitting. So, sorry, our unilateral like movements, i.e. walking, is like a split squat. It's more similar, more specific to a split squat, whereas a barbell squat is more similar to sitting. And I do a lot more sitting right now than I do walking. And so my hypothesis is that's where the correlation is coming from. This is not evidence-based. This is, well, it's...
I was going to ask you, is that evidence-based, Jim?
Yeah. This is I haven't written it down.
Purely anecdotal.
Yeah. But hey, actually that brings up a good point. And I wanted to bring it up because you mentioned evidence-based and you also are in the classroom. One of the things that's obvious to me with the classroom is that you mentioned you care about being evidence-based and being outcome-based. I think that a lot of our processes are more outcome-based than like evidence-based, but the evidence we use is actually uniformly anecdotal, in that it's you. We're not taking Jessica's program and applying it to you. It's your program and applying it to you and learning from that. So was that uncomfortable at first to like know that it's not based on like some unified body of research, or maybe it's influenced by, but it's more about you? Or
no, not uncomfortable at all. I feel like out of my I think it is based on evidence-based training science, exercise science, kinesiology. It is the thing that drew me to RTS, I wouldn't say it drew me. What got me to be committed and trust was that how individualized it was. Again, I had always been prescribed workouts that were volume-based or like percentage-based, load-based. And there was never individualization. It was like everyone's going to run the same program, whether you respond to it or you don't. So like time to peak, I was like, what the hell is that? I don't even know what we're talking about. I just thought everyone peaked in, 8 weeks all the time. I mean, whatever. So the fact that it was, as a dietitian, also, I love I call it like the experiment of one, right? I'm my own experiment. My clients, they are also, my athletes, they're their experiment of one. And what works, of course, we have a foundation, we have guidelines, and we have sort of a structure, but that's not going to work for everyone. So I love how individualized the programming has been. And it's also collaborative. It's not just, because what's the point of doing something if you hate it? Like this exercise might be the best thing for you, but if you hate it, well, there's always an alternative to get you to where you want to be. So I feel like we've been able to collaborate through time. At first, I wasn't able to participate in that so much, but now we're at a point where we're able to say, okay, this is what your data has shown is most effective for you. This is what works, you responded to best. And then we collaborate and say, what do we want to repeat? What do we want to add? Where we have weaknesses, and then we go from there. So just because it's not like a complete like script, well, humans aren't meant to, we're human beings, so we're never going to all respond the exact way to evidence-based things. So that's our foundation to make smart decisions, healthy decisions that aren't going to kill you, get you hurt, and you're going to respond in a pretty predictable way. So no, I think it's been good.
What's interesting to me is hearing you say all of this. It just shows the knowledge that you've acquired about yourself and about the process. Like, I feel like I could sit here for another 2 hours hearing you talk about this, And what's interesting to me is a few months ago, you had reached out about, being interested in the RTS classroom, being interested in coaching, and you talked about the COVID situation and having just time and an opportunity. Well, one of the things that you started working on was trying to create some programs. Do you want to talk a little bit about that project and what it's been like for you?
Yeah, so I'm super excited about this. This is so fun. So John and I teamed up and we collaborated to design a 16-week hypertrophy program that we're going to have available through RTS. You would probably do a better job articulating the programming behind it, but essentially it's a muscle building program. So this is something that I love. I have always been a really diverse athlete, and I pick these sports that have very specific competitive, right? Like powerlifting, you need to be good at the squat, the bench, and the deadlift. So it becomes very specific. But I always, even though I love those and I love like maxing out intensity on that, I really always miss having a really well-rounded athletic program. Or not program, just lifestyle. I think it's fun to have more diversity. I think, it's really important to be a healthy person. So every time I know when we're getting ready to plan our next development cycle, you're like, okay, is there anything you want to add? And I'm always asking for more, right? But as we get closer to competition, obviously that's got to get weeded out. We need to be specific. But I think it's really important. A lot of my injuries, I don't get injured very often, but I've been injured several times. And most of that stems from doing the same movement repetitively and under heavy load. So something that I really think is important is to move in a lot of different planes, to have variety. We want to have a strong body armor, right? To be able to do anything. So I'm super excited about this program that we put together, this hypertrophy muscle building program, because I feel like this would be the best suited if you did it kind of like right after a competition and you want to change it up and you want to rebuild your muscle mass, or if you did it early in a preparatory phase, I think it would be super ideal. We all want to look good. We all want to be jacked. So you're going to get that, priorities. And then, it's also going to really make you durable and healthy. Like, I can give you an example. I went backpacking this weekend and I had the best time ever. I went into the wilderness with my girlfriend, one of my friends, and, I don't do conditioning hardly ever. I want to, I just don't have time. So the priority is to practice the lift. But if I had all the time in the world, I'd be doing a lot more of that, but I don't. So I, love to ride my bike. I love doing outdoors things. I was able to go backpack I overpacked because I did pack my wine, and that's very heavy. And my pack was like 45 pounds. It was out of control. That is not smart packing.
Serious rucking.
It was rucking to
definitely
the
rucking.
max. Yeah. But I was able, even though I'm not trained for that, because of the work that we do in the gym, I felt strong and my endurance was phenomenal. The altitude didn't bother me. I was able to hike up steep mountains. I just felt I just got home last night. I'm not even sore today. And so that's what I wanted from our program. I wanted it to be something that's fun, gives you tons of variety, makes you gonna look hella good. And you're still going to focus on the strength piece. You're still going to focus on the core power lifts. Competition lifts are always the best. And we don't want to sacrifice that. So I'm really excited about the launch of this new project.
Yeah, true story. I actually had to program new exercises into the RTS ecosystem to make this program of yours happen. And from my end, it's just been such a cool opportunity to see, your athletic improvements from a coaching perspective, but to also see the knowledge that you've gained about yourself and emerging strategies but also now to see how you would craft something that would be fun and different for people
Mm-hmm.
and would give them a bit of your story and your experience. Like the way I look at your specific program, it's your story, right? It's all of these different movements that you have found to be fun, to be enjoyable, that have contributed to your athletic background and your frame, and also what your success has been in powerlifting. So it's just been a really cool opportunity, and I have to say it's been a pleasure working with you on it. And I think people will really like it. And I love the idea of using it right after a meet. I think that's a fantastic idea.
Yeah. That's a great way to pivot into a new goals and really build your foundation again, build your body composition, your muscle mass, move differently, feel really good, and then you're just going to hit the next competition training cycle super strong.
And one requirement that you had was there had to be bicep curls. And there are lots of bicep curls.
Yes.
So
everybody
Jim,
wants the pump.
So Jim, that would be an exciting one for you because you do like to do the bicep curls.
Yeah, I just feel like I've been less motivated to like look good. Because I only need to look good from above here now, above my chest, because I only talk to people through like Zoom and stuff. So I don't like flex a lot, you know what I mean? But yes, I do like them. I think this program, it sounds exciting. I wish I had I know I know you guys weren't selling this to me, but I was like excited about it because I was like, man, it would be cool to be able to go hiking and not be sore, and live in California. Mostly that. I think that was what I was thinking about mostly was the fact that you live in California.
Jim, I'm waiting for you to come visit.
Yeah.
I got your room ready.
Oh.
I got the gym ready. You just, I know it's not good to get on the airplane. Maybe it should be road trip style.
Yo, I'm a fan of road trips. For anyone that doesn't know this about me is when I was younger, we never flew anywhere because it was like a little bit expensive. So we got a van and we just drive around the country. We went from Minnesota is where I'm from, by the way, if you know, down to the southernmost point of Texas in what's Corpus Christi, I think is pretty damn close to the end. It was like 27-hour drive or something. I think California though is like 32-hour drive from here, which is still exciting. I think I could probably pull it off.
So that's less than 2 days. You could be here like by Wednesday by Thursday. I'm ready.
That's exciting.
Yes.
I'm pumped that you guys have this together, this program kind of built, because it sounds like a lot of it has a lot of your flair. It has a lot of that stuff that you really like about training in general, and has some of your kind of training philosophy baked into it. I know there are a few other things that are important to you when it comes to training. From what I understand, you have some kind of bonus add-ons to the training itself in terms of how you like to prepare for training. Maybe touch on a little bit of that, because everyone always asks us like, how should I warm up? And I always say like, do your thing, like whatever makes you feel good. But obviously having a little bit more instruction too is helpful.
Yeah, so we included that in as just optional and suggested ideas. I'm a firm believer in making sure, again, that it's not really about, I really value, you got to save time. Like if your training sessions are already 2 to 3 hours and you have a window, like anything beyond that is excessive, right? So it needs to be efficient. So I'm guilty of not always warming up too, but I think you can get a lot of your warm-ups done under the barbell. Let's just maximize time. It's specific to the movement that you're going to be doing. That makes a lot of sense. But I also think spending a brief amount of time doing some maybe 2 or 3 dynamic warm-up movements that also couple maybe as like GPP, general physical preparedness movements, to get you to be a better athletic, healthy person so that you're moving in different planes and different ways. That's really important. And then we have maybe you could do 1 to 2 movement specific warm-up exercises. So within the program, we've put together a list of ideas of how you could just mix or match, just pick 2 off the list and just do it. And I'm hoping that, like, I think we're going to probably put out some videos about that, maybe some demonstrations of how to do that. But when I did weightlifting and powerlifting and a lot of time at the physical therapist's office, because again, I have very poor mobility that limits my ability to get into depth position and meet technical requirements, I've compiled all of these things that have worked for me over several years and that have been recommended to me by expert coaches and expert health providers, like from physical therapy. So that's where that has come from. But it shouldn't take a lot of time.
Yeah.
It's just something very simple and easy, and then you just do your primary warm-up with barbell.
Yeah, it's so cool that you've put that together. And honestly, there's some things on there that I've said I'd love to try that. So it's been a cool learning opportunity to learn that from you, and to see how you could find a way to do a warm up really quickly, because that's always the biggest barrier to entry for people is like, I don't want to spend 30 minutes, 45 minutes warming up,
Yeah.
right? And you found a way to make that a bit easier. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah,
And that's a nice feature.
Yeah, we're talking 5 to 10 minutes maximum, because you want to get lifting. Nobody's got time for that, to be wasting 30 minutes rolling out, stretching with the bands, doing your dynamic things. It needs to be very, very efficient and also feel good though. So, most of us, including myself, sit all day long, like Jim said, and it's just to get you into healthier positions mostly, so you don't get hurt. Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, this has been such a great conversation, Amanda, and I am sure that when Jim takes the trip to you,
Yeah.
there'll be
I'll
even
see you
more
Thursday.
conversation. and
Yeah, I'm actually
videos.
packed up all ready to go. All this
Yes.
stuff's behind me.
And I was serious, Jim, about Snack Captain shirt. It had better be
That sounds
here by next
good.
week.
Oh man, we gotta get some
it-
creative shirts. I'll have Sam when you listen to this. That's one of the shirts we gotta put together.
Exactly.
Oh, Ross just showed me the summer line of all the cool RTS gear. I had no idea those were on. Those are dope. The trucker hat, the ladies tank.
I did it.
Yes, I need some.
You need some bling. You need some bling.
Yeah, we gotta
I
throw.
need some bling. Those are fantastic, and we'll add the Snack Captain shirt to the collection.
Yeah, if you guys like this
Sounds
podcast, by the way, this idea, if you're listening to this and you like the Snack Captain shirts, send us like a DM on Instagram, because it'll give us more encouragement to put some effort into those, because that'd be exciting.
Or just reshare this and put the hashtag Snack Captain.
Yeah, hashtag. I can't do that.
It's hard to say,
Hashtag
right?
Snack Captain.
Well, this has been awesome, Amanda. And where could people follow you if they're interested in learning more about you and seeing your lifting?
So probably the best place is Instagram. What is my handle? It is Amanda _ Allen, ALLEN. Oh my gosh, you guys, I don't even know my handle. What is it? Hold on.
Okay, it's a race. I'm racing. Who's going to win? It's Amanda _ Allen, ALLEN _ M as in Mary, S as in Sam, R as in Robert, D as in David.
Did you say M as in
Thank you.
M as in Mancy?
Mary.
Mary. Oh, okay. I think you said Mancy.
Mancy. That's a new word. I like that.
It's an Archer joke. Anyone listens to that?
So yeah, it's awesome that to have you on. And if anyone is interested in following Amanda, that's her Instagram account. And we'll hope to have you back on soon, talking a little bit about more about your athletic journey and how you're progressing in the sport.
Yeah, I encourage anyone to reach out to me, send me a message on Instagram, because again, I think networking is really important. I would love to keep learning and meeting other lifters and kind of growing that support system. And for new lifters, I am happy to be a support system and help answer questions, provide any insight that I might have. So feel free to reach out, and thank you guys. It was a pleasure. It was so fun.
Yeah, thanks, Amanda.
Thanks for having me on.
Thanks, Amanda.
Thank you for listening to today's episode featuring Amanda Allen and her coach, John Garofano. And we hope that you enjoyed our roundtable discussion where we talk about individualizing pivot blocks. If you are an athlete listening to this and you resonate with Amanda Allen's story and you resonate with her adaptive template and how it's designed, you want to build some more muscle, you want to focus on just overall aesthetics while also getting strong in the power lifts, then you can check out Amanda Allen's adaptive template on the RTS website at reactivetrainingsystems.com. Go to store and then go to adaptive templates and you can find out more information about her program. If you're a coach and you're wondering what adaptive templates can do for me, think of adaptive templates as creative fuel. These are programs that were developed by the coach and the lifter together that resonate with their training philosophies, what they found to work well over the course of their development blocks, and it adapts to your training schedule and your equipment availability. So if you're interested in checking that out, you can find it at store.reactivetrainingsystems.com. Thanks for listening to this episode, and we'll talk to you in the next one.